Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The story begins on a cold November morning in 1897 when a local hunter from Tenney County, Missouri, stumbled upon what he initially thought was an animal carcass near the White River. The discovery, partially concealed by fallen leaves and overgrown with moss, would later be identified as a collection of peculiarly arranged human remains, not scattered, as one might expect from animal interference, but methodically positioned in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. The hunter, James Wilkins, immediately notified the county sheriff. What followed was an investigation that would remain largely undocumented for decades. Relegated to whispered conversations among local families and obscure county records that gathered dust until a university researcher uncovered them in 1962. The remains were traced back to the Harper homestead, a remote property nestled deep in the densely wooded hills approximately 14 miles southeast of Branson. The Harper family had settled there in 1881 after migrating from eastern Tennessee. According to land records filed with the county clerk's office, Thomas Harper purchased 120 acres of heavily forested land for what was considered a suspiciously low sum at the time. The previous owner, a man named Jeremiah Caldwell, had reportedly left the area abruptly, telling neighbors only that the land wasn't right for raising livestock. This detail, while seemingly insignificant, would later become a point of interest for those investigating the Harper case. Thomas Harper arrived with his wife, Eliza, and their 5 children. William, 17, Martha, 15, Joseph, 12, Rebecca, 9, and Samuel, 6. Census records indicate that Thomas listed his occupation as carpenter and bone trader. The latter designation raised few eyebrows at the time, as the collection and sale of animal bones for fertilizer and industrial use was a common supplementary income for frontier families. What wasn't common, however, was the singular focus the Harper family would develop on this particular trade. The Harpers built their homestead in a narrow valley, partially concealed by a ridge that blocked the morning sun. Neighbors were scarce, with the closest farm belonging to the Peterson family some 3 miles to the north. According to a statement given to the Tenney County Historical Society in 1951, Mary Peterson, then in her 80s, recalled that the Harpers kept to themselves in a way that wasn't normal even for mountain folk. She noted that Thomas Harper would occasionally visit the general store in Forsyth for supplies, but the rest of the family was rarely seen in town. When they did appear, Mary described them as unnaturally pale, like people who lived underground. The Harper children did not attend the local school, with Thomas informing the county that his wife was providing their education at home. Church records from the Forsyth Baptist Church indicate that the family never attended services despite multiple invitations from the pastor. This social isolation was not particularly unusual for the time and place, as many mountain families maintained a degree of separation from community institutions. What did raise concerns, however, was the reported behavior of Thomas Harper during his infrequent interactions with townspeople. A store ledger from Forsyth General Merchandise preserved in the County Historical Archive shows that Thomas made regular purchases of unusual quantities of vinegar, salt, and lye, all substances used in the preparation and preservation of bones. More telling was an entry from October 1893, noting that Thomas had placed a special order for several medical textbooks on human anatomy, paying with a pouch of silver coins rather than store credit or barter as was customary. The storekeeper, Edwin Mitchell, made a notation in the margin of the ledger that reads, "Harper claims books for educating children paid in Spanish silver." Wouldn't say where it came from. This notation would later become significant when investigators discovered that several travelers reported missing in the region had been carrying Spanish currency acquired during business ventures in the Southwest Territories. Life on the Harper homestead followed a routine that neighbors found difficult to discern due to the family's isolation. However, according to a journal kept by Eliza Harper, discovered in 1962 during the renovation of the old Harper property, the family's days revolved around what she referred to as the collection. The journal, fragmentary and water-damaged, contains entries spanning from 1891 to 1896. In these pages, Eliza describes a daily regimen that included the cleaning, preservation, and arrangement of bones. One entry dated June 17, 1893 reads, "Thomas returned with new specimens today. The children helped with the cleaning. William shows particular skill with the smaller pieces. Thomas says he has natural hands for the work. Martha refused to assist again. Thomas had words with her in the cellar. She has been quiet since." While the journal never explicitly identifies the source of these specimens, the context strongly suggests they were not exclusively animal in origin. Eliza frequently mentioned special collections that required more delicate handling and were kept separate from what she called the common stock. These special collections were apparently stored in a root cellar beneath the main house, accessible through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. According to Mary Peterson's testimony, strange sounds were occasionally heard coming from the Harper property on still nights. She described them as not quite animal, not quite human, a kind of wailing that carried across the valley. When asked by a neighbor about the noises, Thomas Harper reportedly explained them away as the wind in the hollow trees or coyotes in the distance. Most neighbors accustomed to the strange acoustics of the mountains and reluctant to intrude on another family's business accepted these explanations. The turning point in the Harper family's isolated existence came in the spring of 1896 when their eldest son William appeared in foresight without warning or explanation. According to an account given by Dr. Samuel Thornton, the town physician, William was in a state of extreme agitation, his clothes soiled and his manner erratic. He requested paper and pencil, but rather than writing a message, he began drawing intricate diagrams of what appeared to be skeletal structures with unusual annotations. When Dr. Thornton attempted to question him, William became increasingly distressed until he finally collapsed from apparent exhaustion. William remained in Dr. Thornton's care for 3 days, during which time he refused to speak about his family or his reason for coming to town. On the morning of the 4th day, Dr. Thornton found William's room empty, the window open, and a note on the bed that contained only 5 words. "They collect more than bones." The physician immediately notified Sheriff Robert Garland, who dispatched 2 deputies to the Harper homestead to investigate. According to the official report filed on April 18, 1896, the deputies found the property apparently abandoned. The house was unlocked with meals half eaten on the table and personal belongings still in place, suggesting a hasty departure. Most disturbing, however, was the discovery of the root cellar. The report describes the space as being arranged in the manner of a museum or study with shelves lining the walls containing hundreds of bones, each meticulously labeled with dates and locations. The deputies noted that while many appeared to be animal remains, certain shelves contained specimens that gave cause for grave concern regarding their origin. The report does not elaborate further, but a personal letter from Deputy James Connor to his brother discovered among family papers in 1959 provides more detail. In this letter, Connor writes, "What we found beneath that house will haunt me until my dying day." The larger specimens were clearly marked with names, not just dates. Some I recognized as belonging to travelers reported missing over the years. Thomas Harper wasn't just collecting bones. He was collecting people. And the worst part, the part one can scarcely bring myself to write, is that some of the specimens showed signs of having been prepared while still, I cannot finish this thought, even on paper. Despite the disturbing discovery, no immediate arrests were made as the entire Harper family had vanished without a trace. Sheriff Garland organized a search party that combed the surrounding forests for several days, but found no sign of them. The case remained open, but inactive until November 1897, when James Wilkins made his discovery near the White River. The remains found by Wilkins were eventually identified as belonging to Thomas and Eliza Harper along with their children, Joseph, Rebecca, and Samuel. Forensic examination, rudimentary by modern standards, suggested they had been deceased for approximately 1 year, placing their deaths shortly after the deputies' visit to the homestead. The manner of their arrangement, positioned in a circular pattern with their skulls facing inward, suggested ritual significance rather than random disposal. Notably absent from the discovery were the remains of William and Martha Harper, the 2 eldest children. Their whereabouts remained unknown, leading to speculation that they might have been responsible for the deaths of the rest of the family. This theory gained credence when investigators discovered a hidden compartment in the wall of the Harper's root cellar containing a journal believed to belong to Martha. The journal, which covered the period from 1894 to 1896, painted a disturbing picture of life in the Harper household. Martha described how her father had gradually shifted his bone-collecting activities from animals to humans, beginning with remains discovered accidentally, travelers who had died from exposure or accidents in the remote terrain, and eventually progressing to more deliberate acquisitions. One entry reads, "Father says each skeleton tells a story and that he is preserving these stories for future generations. Mother helps him prepare them using techniques father learned from a book he keeps locked in his trunk. William has begun to assist as well, showing an enthusiasm that frightens me. Yesterday, he asked father if different types of people have different bone structures. The way he looked at me as he asked made my blood run cold." Martha's journal suggests that she and William had formed a pact to escape the homestead, but disagreed about what to do regarding their younger siblings. The final entry, dated April 10, 1896, states only, "William has gone to town. I was supposed to wait for his signal, but I can't leave the little ones behind. Not after what I overheard father telling William last night. I've decided what must be done." The journal ends abruptly, leaving the events that followed to speculation. Based on the evidence available, investigators in 1962 proposed the following sequence of events. Martha, fearing for her younger siblings' safety, confronted her parents, resulting in a violent altercation that left the family dead. She then arranged their remains in a ritual pattern where they were eventually discovered before disappearing herself. The discovery of the Harper family's remains generated surprisingly little public attention at the time. A brief notice appeared in the Springfield Republican on December 3, 1897, mentioning only that the remains of a frontier family were discovered in Tenney County with the foul play suspected. No follow-up articles were published and the case was apparently considered closed by authorities. This lack of public record contributed to the obscurity of the Harper case until its rediscovery decades later. However, local oral histories preserved accounts that official records did not. According to interviews conducted by Dr. Eleanor Kaufman in the early 1960s, residents of Tenney County passed down stories of the Bone family for generations. These accounts often mentioned a peculiar detail not found in any official documentation that when the bodies of the Harpers were discovered, each had a small bone from another family member placed inside their mouth. This detail, while impossible to verify decades later, suggests a ritual aspect to their deaths that align with Martha's journal entries about her father's beliefs regarding the power contained within bones. The winter of 1897-1898 was particularly harsh in the Ozarks, with heavy snowfall and prolonged periods of freezing temperatures. According to weather records from the time, Tenney County experienced nearly continuous snow cover from mid-December through late February. During this period, several isolated homesteads reported strange incidents. Livestock found with precise surgical-like incisions, windows that had been carefully removed and replaced without breaking the glass, and in one case a sleeping child who awoke to find someone methodically measuring their limbs with a piece of string. In each instance, tracks in the snow led into the forest, but disappeared after a short distance, as though the visitor had deliberately obscured their trail. While never officially connected to the Harper case, these incidents occurred primarily within a 15 miles radius of the former Harper homestead. They ceased abruptly in March 1898, coinciding with the arrival of spring and the melting of the winter snow. Some speculated that either William or Martha had returned to the area briefly before moving on, though no confirmed sightings of either were reported. In the spring of 1898, a woman matching Martha's description arrived in the small town of Mountain Home, Arkansas, approximately 60 miles south of the Harper homestead. According to town records, she identified herself as Margaret Wilson and took up residence in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. She offered her services as a midwife and bone setter, claiming to have learned these skills from her grandmother in Tennessee. The town doctor, initially skeptical of her abilities, later acknowledged her unusual skill in treating complex fractures and dislocations. In a letter to a medical colleague in Little Rock, he wrote, "Miss Wilson possesses an understanding of skeletal anatomy that surpasses many formally trained physicians. Her methods for realigning broken bones are unorthodox but remarkably effective. Most curious is her insistence on being compensated, not with money, but with what she terms specimens, typically small bones from butchered animals, though I have heard she has requested to keep certain pathological specimens from her human patients as well. Margaret Wilson remained in Mountain Home for approximately 14 months before departing. Suddenly in the summer of 1899. During her stay, she kept largely to herself, though several residents recalled her particular interest in collecting and preserving animal skeletons, which she claimed to study for medical purposes. A local carpenter who helped her install shelving in her cabin reported that one entire room was dedicated to these specimens, arranged in what he described as a most systematic and unnerving manner. Shortly after Wilson's departure from Mountain Home, a similar woman appeared in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, using the name Marion White. Again, she offered services as a healer and midwife with a particular expertise in skeletal problems. This pattern would repeat across the Ozark region over the next 3 decades. A solitary woman with exceptional knowledge of bones would appear in a small community, remain for a period ranging from several months to a few years, and then vanish without warning, often following unexplained deaths in the area. Meanwhile, William Harper's trail led in a different direction. County records from Greene County, Missouri, indicate that in late 1896, a young man named William Smith purchased a small property on the outskirts of Springfield. Tax records describe the property as including a dwelling and workshop, with Smith listing his occupation as articulator of specimens, a technical term for someone who assembles skeletal displays for medical or educational purposes. Smith's business apparently thrived as he expanded his workshop in 1899 and again in 1902. A business directory from 1900 includes an advertisement for Smith's articulated specimens, precision preparations for medical education, offering complete human and animal skeletal assemblies of the highest quality. The advertisement notes that Smith specialized in rare pathological specimens and comparative anatomical displays, suggesting a focus on unusual or abnormal skeletal structures. What makes this connection to William Harper particularly compelling is a detail found in a Springfield police report from 1901. According to the report, a medical student at a nearby college reported concerns about Smith after visiting his workshop to commission a skeletal display for the school. The student stated that Smith maintained a private collection in a locked room behind his workshop, which the student glimpsed briefly when Smith opened the door. He described seeing dozens of human skulls arranged on shelves, each bearing small etched markings and displayed in a manner suggesting reverence rather than scientific interest. The police followed up with a cursory investigation, but found nothing actionable as Smith possessed the proper licenses for handling medical specimens and claimed all his materials were legally acquired from medical schools and hospitals. The investigation was closed without charges, though the reporting officer noted that Smith's workshop had a peculiar odor, not of decay, but of chemicals, as though great effort had been made to preserve what should naturally return to the earth. Smith operated his business in Springfield until 1917 when he relocated to Kansas City. City directories and business records show that he established a new workshop there, expanding his business to supply specimens to medical schools throughout the Midwest. His reputation for exceptional quality and attention to detail earned him contracts with prestigious institutions, including Washington University in St. Louis and the University of Kansas Medical School. What these institutions didn't know was the origin of Smith's extraordinary skill with bones. A former apprentice interviewed by Dr. Kaufman in 1963 recalled that Smith would sometimes speak of his childhood education while working late into the night. According to the apprentice, Smith claimed to have learned his trade from his father, who collected people's stories through their bones and believed that the essence of a person resided in their skeleton, waiting to be read by those who knew how to listen. The apprentice also reported a disturbing ritual he observed Smith performing when he thought he was alone. Smith would select a bone from his private collection, place it against his ear, and remain motionless for several minutes as though listening to something. Afterward, he would make notes in a leather-bound journal that he kept locked in a drawer. When the apprentice questioned him about this behavior, Smith allegedly replied, "Every bone whispers the story of its owner. Some tell tales of joy, others of sorrow. The most interesting ones tell secrets their owners tried to take to their graves." Smith's business continued to operate successfully until his death in 1938. His obituary in the Kansas City Star described him as a respected artisan in the specialized field of medical preparation who had contributed significantly to medical education throughout the region. It noted that he had no known surviving family and had left his estate to be divided among several medical institutions. The obituary made no mention of his early life or origins. The fate of Smith's private collection remains uncertain. According to inventory records from his estate, the collection was not among the materials transferred to the medical schools. A former neighbor interviewed in 1965 claimed that in the weeks before his death, Smith had received several visits from a stern-looking woman who removed numerous boxes from his home during late-night visits. The neighbor described the woman as elderly but remarkably strong with eyes that seemed to look right through you. This description bears striking similarity to accounts of the Bone Lady who was reported in various Ozark communities during the same period. In Mountain View, Missouri, local historian Clarence Jenkins documented stories of an elderly woman who lived in a remote cabin near town from 1935 to 1937. Jenkins wrote, "The woman who gave her name only as Martha was known for her ability to treat ailments related to the bones and joints. Locals sought her help for everything from arthritis to broken limbs. She required unusual payment, a lock of hair, nail clippings, or in some cases the extraction of a small unnecessary bone such as a floating rib or small toe joint which she claimed hindered proper healing." Jenkins' account continues, "When she departed our community, several elderly residents who had been under her care were found deceased in their homes. Authorities ruled the deaths natural, as the deceased were all of advanced age and showed no signs of violence. However, subsequent burial preparation revealed that each body had been subtly altered, small incisions made and sutured, closed with remarkable skill. In each case, family members reported that certain bones appeared to be missing from the deceased, though no formal investigation was ever conducted. The last confirmed sighting of a woman believed to be Martha Harper occurred in Eureka Springs, Arkansas in 1941. By this time, she would have been approximately 75 years old. According to local newspaper accounts, an elderly woman known to residents as Mother Bones lived in a small cabin in the woods outside town for several years. She was rarely seen, but was known to leave remedies made from ground bone and herbs on the doorsteps of ailing residents, often before they had publicly disclosed their illnesses. In the winter of 1941, following a severe ice storm, several concerned residents checked on the woman's cabin and found it abandoned. Inside, they discovered what the Eureka Springs Times-Echo described as a museum of mortality. Hundreds of bones of various sizes arranged in concentric circles throughout the single-room dwelling. At the center of these circles was a small wooden box containing what appeared to be a collection of children's teeth, each meticulously labeled with a name and date. Most disturbing was a journal found beneath a loose floorboard containing entries that spanned decades. The final entry dated December 18, 1941 read, "William is gone now. I felt his passing 3 nights ago. The collection calls me back to where it began. The circle must be completed." The journal was turned over to local authorities but disappeared from the evidence room before it could be thoroughly examined. The deputy sheriff, who initially secured the journal, later resigned from his position and left the area without explanation. The Harper case might have remained an obscure footnote in Ozark history had it not been for the work of Dr. Eleanor Kaufman, an anthropologist from the University of Missouri who began researching Ozark folk practices in 1960. During her fieldwork, Dr. Kaufman repeatedly encountered references to bone collectors in local folklore, families who supposedly collected and preserved human remains for mysterious purposes. Initially dismissing these stories as superstition, her perspective changed when she discovered the county records relating to the Harper family. Dr. Kaufman's research led her to interview dozens of elderly residents throughout the Ozarks who recalled encounters with individuals matching the descriptions of William and Martha Harper. These interviews revealed a consistent pattern. Both siblings appeared to have continued their family's bone-collecting practices, though in different ways. William operated within a quasi-legitimate business context, supplying medical specimens while maintaining his private collection. Martha adopted a more nomadic approach, moving between remote communities and collecting specimens through her work as a healer. What emerged from Dr. Kaufman's research was a disturbing possibility that the Harpers were practitioners of an obscure tradition predating their arrival in America. According to documents she uncovered in the archives of the American Folklore Society, similar practices had been reported among isolated communities in the Carpathian Mountains of Eastern Europe, where certain families were believed to serve as keepers of the dead, preserving selected bones from deceased community members to maintain a physical connection between the living and their ancestors. This tradition, according to Dr. Kaufman's research, was based on the belief that bones retained the essence or memory of their owners. By collecting and preserving bones from various individuals, the keepers supposedly gained access to the collective knowledge and experiences of those individuals. The more diverse the collection, the greater the accumulated wisdom available to the keeper. Dr. Kaufman proposed that this tradition had been transported to America by early European settlers and had taken root in the isolated communities of the Appalachian and Ozark regions, where it evolved into the practices exhibited by the Harper family. She suggested that Thomas Harper had been a keeper in the traditional sense, collecting bones primarily from the already deceased, but that over time his methods had become more aggressive as he sought to expand his collection. The most troubling aspect of Dr. Kaufman's research was her conclusion that the Harper family was not unique. Her interviews and archival research uncovered evidence of at least 7 other families throughout the Appalachian and Ozark regions who engaged in similar practices between the early 1800s and the mid-20th century. While none were as well documented as the Harper case, they shared common elements: isolated homesteads, unusual interest in anatomical study, and connections to missing persons in their vicinity. In a paper published in a limited circulation academic journal in 1964, Dr. Kaufman wrote, "These bone collector families appear to operate independently of one another, though they share a common folkloric tradition. They typically maintain their practices for several generations before either abandoning them or meeting with violent ends, often at the hands of their own family members." What is perhaps most disturbing is the possibility that this tradition continues in the present day, adapted to modern circumstances, but retaining its essential character. Dr. Kaufman's research came to an abrupt halt in 1968 when she took a sabbatical to investigate similar folklore in the isolated mountain communities of eastern Kentucky. According to her department chair, she intended to return after 6 months, but never did. Her vehicle was discovered parked at a trailhead near Pineville, Kentucky, with her research materials neatly organized inside, but no trace of Dr. Kaufman herself was ever found. The official report concluded she had likely suffered an accident while hiking alone in the rugged terrain. Curiously, among her effects was a sealed envelope addressed to her university department to be opened only in the event of her disappearance. When opened, it contained a single page with a list of family names and locations throughout the Appalachian region, with the Harper family prominently circled. Below the list was written a quote attributed to Martha Harper's journal, though this particular passage had never been included in Dr. Kaufman's published work. The collection grows, but so does the hunger of the collectors. And when the old collectors can no longer satisfy their hunger, new collectors must take their place. Even more intriguing was a small notebook found in Dr. Kaufman's glove compartment containing observations from her recent fieldwork. The final entry, dated 3 days before her disappearance, described an encounter with an elderly woman in a remote hollow who claimed to be the granddaughter of Martha Harper. According to the notebook, this woman invited Dr. Kaufman to view what she called the family legacy, a collection supposedly begun by Thomas Harper and continued through 3 generations. Dr. Kaufman wrote, "Mrs. E showed me to a root cellar beneath her kitchen, accessed through a trapdoor concealed under a rug. The space beyond defies easy description. Shelves line every wall, holding hundreds of bones, each meticulously labeled and arranged according to some system I cannot yet discern. Mrs. E claims these specimens speak to her, revealing the experiences and knowledge of their former owners. When I expressed skepticism, she selected a small finger bone from a drawer, pressed it to my forehead, and described with unsettling accuracy details of my childhood that I have never shared with anyone. She has invited me to return tomorrow for what she calls a proper education in listening to the bones. Despite my scientific reservations, I find myself compelled to accept." No subsequent entries appear in the notebook, and Dr. Kaufman's planned return visit to Mrs. E represents the last known information about her movements before her disappearance. Authorities searched the area based on her notes, but were unable to locate any resident matching the description of Mrs. E or any property with a root cellar matching Dr. Kaufman's description. The case was eventually classified as a presumed accidental death, though her body was never recovered. The Harper homestead itself is now long gone. The land reclaimed by the forest that surrounds it. In 1972, a hiking trail was proposed that would have passed near the property, but the project was abandoned after 2 surveyors working in the area reported feeling watched by something unseen and hearing the sound of something moving through the underbrush, following but never showing itself. Local residents still avoid the area, referring to it simply as Harper Hollow, and warn their children against venturing too deep into those particular woods. In 1985, a graduate student researching Ozark folklore attempted to locate the exact site of the Harper homestead using county land records and topographical maps. According to his research notes, he identified a clearing that matched the description and dimensions of the Harper property. At the center of this clearing, he discovered a circle of unusually lush vegetation approximately 20 feet in diameter. The exact dimensions reported for the root cellar beneath the Harper house. Soil samples taken from this circle reportedly contained elevated levels of calcium phosphate consistent with long-term decomposition of bone material. The student's research notes end with an observation that continues to disturb those familiar with the case. As I was preparing to leave the site, I noticed something partially buried at the edge of the clearing. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be a small hand-carved wooden box. Inside was a single human finger bone yellowed with age with what looked like tiny numbers etched into the surface. I replaced it exactly as I found it and left immediately. Some collections, I believe, are best left undisturbed. In 1992, an unusual medical case was reported at the University of Arkansas Medical Center in Little Rock. A 78-year-old woman from a rural community in the Ozarks was admitted with advanced osteoporosis. During routine X-rays, doctors discovered something extraordinary. The woman had more than 30 small bone fragments embedded in the soft tissues throughout her body, primarily clustered around major joints and the base of her skull. More remarkable was the fact that these fragments did not match her own bone structure. They appeared to come from multiple different individuals. When questioned about this anomaly, the woman reportedly told doctors that her grandmother had been a bone woman who placed the fragments there when she was a child to share the strength of others with her. She claimed the practice was a family tradition dating back generations and requested that upon her death, certain of her bones be preserved and passed to her granddaughter to continue the tradition. Medical staff documented the case but did not publish it in mainstream medical journals due to ethical concerns. The woman's name was redacted from the hospital records, but her birth county was listed as Tenney, the same county where the Harper family had lived. This case raises disturbing questions about how the practices of the bone collectors might have evolved over time. If Dr. Kaufman's research is correct, the tradition didn't die with the Harper family, but adapted and continued, passing from one generation to the next in increasingly subtle forms. The isolation of many rural communities, particularly in mountainous regions, provides ample opportunity for unusual practices to continue undetected by outside authorities. In 2002, a routine archaeological survey conducted prior to the expansion of a state highway near the Arkansas-Missouri border uncovered a series of unmarked graves dating from the mid-19th to early 20th centuries. What drew attention to these particular burials was the condition of the remains. Each skeleton was incomplete with specific bones removed with surgical precision. The archaeologist who documented the site noted in his report that the pattern of bone removal was consistent across all burials, suggesting a systematic practice rather than isolated incidents of grave robbery. The report was filed with the State Historical Preservation Office and promptly classified due to the sensitive nature of the findings. Most disturbing was the discovery of a small metal box buried between 2 of the graves. Inside were several human finger bones, each etched with minute symbols that bore striking resemblance to the cataloging system described in accounts of the Harper collection. Carbon dating placed the box and its contents in the early 1900s, consistent with the period when Martha Harper would have been active in the region. The archaeologist requested permission to conduct a more thorough investigation of the site, but funding was denied and the area was paved over as originally planned. In 2007, a fire at a storage facility in Springfield, Missouri, led to an unexpected discovery. Among the damaged items recovered from a long-abandoned unit was a collection of journals and specimen containers dating back to the early 20th century. The journals contained detailed anatomical notes and sketches along with what appeared to be a cataloging system for human remains. The name W. Smith appeared on several of the entries with dates ranging from 1901 to 1935. Most significant was a family tree drawn on the inside cover of one journal, tracing a lineage from Thomas and Eliza Harper through their son, William, with a notation Smith in parenthesis, and continuing to individuals living in the Springfield area at the time the journal was last updated. This discovery provided the first concrete evidence linking William Harper to William Smith and confirming that he had established a new identity after fleeing the family homestead. The specimen containers held various small human bones, each meticulously labeled with names, dates, and locations. A handwritten note included with the collection explained that these specimens represented the accumulated wisdom of 3 generations, preserved for those who know how to listen. The note was signed simply a Harper with no indication of which family member had authored it or when the storage unit had originally been rented. Local authorities confiscated the materials and attempted to trace the individuals named on the family tree, but found that most had either died or relocated, leaving no forwarding addresses. The bones were eventually turned over to the state medical examiner's office for proper burial, but the journals were retained as evidence in what was classified as a historical investigation with no active suspects. The question that continues to haunt researchers is whether the Harper tradition truly ended with these discoveries or whether it continues in some form to the present day. The isolated nature of many rural communities in the Ozark and Appalachian regions provides ample opportunity for unusual practices to persist undetected. Dr. Kaufman's research suggested that the bone collectors were adaptable, modifying their methods to suit changing circumstances while maintaining the essential character of their tradition. In 2015, a hospice nurse working in rural Arkansas reported an unusual pattern among elderly patients in certain communities. She noted that family members would often request to be left alone with the deceased for several hours before funeral homes were contacted and that subsequent examination sometimes revealed small skillfully made incisions near joints or the base of the skull. When questioned, family members typically attributed these marks to old-time traditions or family customs without elaborating further. The nurse documented her observations and submitted them to her supervisor who forwarded the report to state health authorities. An investigation was launched but yielded inconclusive results as the practices appeared to be confined to a small number of interconnected families who were reluctant to discuss their traditions with outsiders. The investigation was eventually closed due to lack of evidence of any crime as no laws specifically prohibit the removal of small bone fragments from deceased family members with the family's consent. This incident suggests that whatever tradition the Harper family practiced may continue in a modified form adapted to modern circumstances but retaining its essential character. If so, then the bone collectors represent not just a historical curiosity, but a living tradition that has survived for generations by remaining just beyond the notice of mainstream society. Local folklore offers one final chilling detail. According to stories still told in parts of Tenney and Stone counties, if you ventured deep enough into the forests around what was once Harper land during the darkest phase of the moon, you might hear the sound of someone carefully arranging small hard objects. The sound is said to be accompanied by a woman's voice softly reciting names and dates as though cataloging entries in a ledger. Those who claim to have heard this voice say it is not threatening or malevolent, but rather focused and methodical. The voice of someone engaged in work they consider important, necessary, and never complete. Whether the story of the Harper family represents an isolated case of frontier madness or evidence of a darker tradition embedded in the cultural history of the region remains open to debate. What is certain is that their story continues to resonate with those who study the hidden histories of rural America, reminding us that beneath the surface of recorded history lie currents of belief and practice that occasionally emerge into the light, only to submerge again before they can be fully understood. In 2018, a retired anthropologist researching folk medicine in the Ozarks encountered an elderly woman in a remote area of Shannon County, Missouri, who claimed her family had been keepers of memory for generations. When asked to elaborate, the woman explained that certain families were tasked with preserving the knowledge and experiences of their communities through what she called physical repositories. She declined to provide specific details, but mentioned that her grandmother had learned the practice from a traveling bone woman in the early 1940s. The anthropologist later discovered that the woman's grandmother had lived briefly in Eureka Springs during the period when Mother Bones was known to reside there. This connection suggests that Martha Harper's influence may have extended beyond her immediate family, creating a network of practitioners who carried on the tradition in various forms. The anthropologist attempted to arrange a Follow-up interview with the woman, but upon returning to the area, found that she had relocated with no forwarding address. Neighbors reported that she had left suddenly after receiving a letter that appeared to distress her greatly. This pattern of sudden departures and strategic relocations appears consistently throughout the history of those connected to the Harper tradition. It suggests a network that maintains communication while remaining deliberately fragmented and difficult to trace. A survival strategy that has served them well for over a century. In 2020, a historical preservation project in Tenney County unearthed a collection of county coroner's reports from the 1890s that had been misfiled and forgotten in a courthouse basement. Among these was a more detailed examination of the Harper family remains discovered by James Wilkins in 1897. The report written by Dr. Lawrence Williams noted several anomalies that had not been included in the official sheriff's report. According to Dr. Williams, the remains of Thomas and Eliza Harper showed evidence of small precise extractions at key points in their skeletons, the atlas vertebrae at the top of the spine, the first joint of the right index finger, and a section of the temporal bone near the ear canal. These extractions appeared to have been performed post-mortem with considerable skill using specialized tools. Similar extractions were noted in the remains of the 3 younger children. Most significantly, Dr. Williams noted that each set of remains had a small bone fragment from another family member placed in the mouth cavity. These fragments appeared to have been deliberately shaped and polished with minute markings etched into their surfaces. In his conclusion, Dr. Williams wrote, "These modifications suggest ritual significance beyond mere murder. The careful extraction of specific bones and the placement of foreign bone fragments in the oral cavities indicate a systematic practice with specific intent, though the nature of this intent remains obscure." Dr. Williams recommended further investigation, but his recommendations were apparently ignored by local authorities eager to close the case. His report was filed away and forgotten until its rediscovery more than a century later. By that time, Dr. Williams himself had long since passed away, taking whatever additional insights he might have had with him. The rediscovery of this report prompted renewed interest in the Harper case among historians and anthropologists specializing in Ozark folklore. One such researcher, Dr. Melissa Chen of the University of Arkansas, began compiling instances of similar practices reported throughout the region. Her work revealed a consistent pattern of bone-related customs that existed on the margins of mainstream society, preserved primarily in isolated communities with limited outside contact. Dr. Chen documented several key characteristics that appeared consistently across these reports. The belief that specific bones retained the essence or memory of their owners. The practice of extracting these memory bones after death. The custom of shaping and marking these bones with symbols unique to each keeper. And the tradition of passing both the collected bones and the knowledge of their use from one generation to the next, typically along female lines. Most intriguing was Dr. Chen's discovery of a common thread connecting many of these accounts, references to a traveling woman who had introduced or reinforced these practices in various communities during the early to mid-20th century. The descriptions of this woman, while varying in specifics, consistently mentioned her exceptional knowledge of skeletal anatomy and her insistence on being compensated with small bone fragments rather than conventional payment. Dr. Chen's research led her to propose that Martha Harper had not simply continued her family's traditions in isolation, but had deliberately spread them throughout the region, creating a dispersed network of practitioners who shared the core beliefs while adapting the practices to their individual circumstances. This network, Dr. Chen suggested, might have served as a means of preserving and protecting the tradition during periods of increased scrutiny or threat. In 2021, Dr. Eve Chen attempted to locate living practitioners of these traditions for first-hand interviews. Her efforts met with limited success as most potential subjects declined to participate or provided only vague generalized information. However, one elderly woman in a remote area of Madison County, Arkansas, agreed to an interview on the condition that her identity be protected and certain details of her practice be omitted from any published work. According to Dr. Chen's field notes, this woman described herself as a bone listener, someone capable of extracting information or memories from the bones of the deceased. She claimed this ability was not supernatural, but rather a learned skill passed down through generations of women in her family. The practice, as she described it, involved not just the preservation of bones, but a complex process of attunement that allowed the keeper to access the memories contained within them. Most revealing was her description of how this tradition had been maintained in the modern era. Rather than the overt collection practices of the Harper family, contemporary listeners typically obtained their specimens through more socially acceptable means, working in medical fields, funeral homes, or archaeological contexts that provided legitimate access to human remains. Some had adapted their practices to focus primarily on personal or family remains, preserving small fragments of deceased relatives rather than collecting from strangers. The woman also confirmed the existence of a loose network of practitioners throughout the region, connected not by formal organization, but by family ties and shared traditions. She mentioned annual gatherings held at rotating locations where listeners would exchange specimens and knowledge. When Dr. Chen asked about the origins of this network, the woman mentioned a name that immediately caught her attention: Bold Martha, who taught my grandmother's generation. This interview provided the strongest evidence yet for the continuation of the Harper tradition into the present day, adapted and disguised to avoid detection, but retaining its essential character. It suggested that Martha Harper's influence extended far beyond her immediate family, creating a legacy that has persisted for more than a century. The Harper homestead site itself has continued to generate reports of unusual phenomena. In 2022, a group of hikers who ventured into the area, despite local warnings, reported finding a clearing that matched the description of the Harper property. At the center of this clearing, they discovered what appeared to be the remains of a stone foundation, possibly the base of the root cellar described in historical accounts. More disturbing was their report of finding a circle of small cairns surrounding this foundation, each containing what they initially thought were animal bones. Upon closer inspection, they realized the bones were human finger and toe fale, each marked with tiny symbols. The hikers reported their find to local authorities. But when sheriff's deputies arrived at the location provided, they found no clearing, no foundation, and no cairns, only dense forest with no sign of recent human activity. This discrepancy has never been satisfactorily explained. The hikers, all experienced outdoor enthusiasts familiar with the region, maintained the accuracy of their report and the precise coordinates they had recorded. Some have suggested they simply became disoriented in the unfamiliar terrain, while others proposed more unusual explanations. Local folklore has incorporated this incident into the Harper legend, suggesting that the site itself appears and disappears according to some unknown pattern visible only to those the bone collectors wish to reveal themselves to. The true extent of the Harper family's activities may never be fully known. County records from the period are incomplete, with several volumes missing or damaged. The number of travelers who went missing in the Ozark region during the Harper family's residence is difficult to determine precisely, but newspaper accounts from Springfield, Missouri, and Little Rock, Arkansas, suggest it may have been substantial, perhaps as many as 30 individuals over a 15-year period. What is perhaps most unsettling about the Harper case is not what we know, but what remains unknown. If Dr. Kaufman's and Dr. Chen's research is to be believed, the Harpers were not unique, but rather part of a wider tradition that has persisted quietly into the modern era. The isolated nature of many rural communities, particularly in mountainous regions, provides ample opportunity for unusual practices to continue undetected by outside authorities. In 2023, an unexpected discovery added another layer to the Harper mystery. During the renovation of an old building in Kansas City that had once housed William Smith's workshop, workers uncovered a sealed compartment in the basement wall. Inside was a metal box containing what appeared to be personal effects, a pocket watch, a set of small specialized tools likely used for working with bones, and most significantly a journal. The journal, which spanned the years 1896 to 1925, appeared to be William Harper Smith's personal record, distinct from his business documentation. Written in a meticulous hand, it detailed his thoughts on what he called the family practice and his efforts to adapt it to modern circumstances. Most revealing were his references to ongoing communication with his sister Martha, whom he described as the true keeper of our tradition. According to the journal, William and Martha maintained contact throughout their lives, sharing specimens and knowledge while pursuing different approaches to their shared heritage. William focused on preservation and study, developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for preparing and maintaining his collection. Martha, in contrast, emphasized transmission and expansion, traveling throughout the region to identify and train others with the potential to become listeners. One entry from 1918 reads, "M reports success in the southern counties. She has identified 7 potential apprentices, 3 showing particular promise." The tradition spreads, though none will know its true source. We remain, as always, in the shadows of our own creation. The journal also reveals William's growing concern about the future of their practice. As modern medicine advanced and society became increasingly interconnected, the opportunities for collection became more limited and the risks of discovery grew. William wrote of the need to adapt to find new methods and contexts for their work that would allow it to continue undetected in a changing world. His solution, detailed in entries from the early 1920s, was to create a legitimate front for their activities, a foundation that would support medical research and education while providing access to the specimens they sought. This foundation, which he called the Smith Anatomical Trust, would operate as a supplier of educational materials to medical schools and research institutions, allowing him to maintain his collection while hiding in plain sight. The final pages of the journal contain what appears to be a coded message addressed to Martha, detailing locations throughout the Ozark region where portions of their collection had been hidden for safekeeping. The code, based on anatomical terminology, has thus far resisted all attempts at complete decipherment, though certain phrases suggest buried caches in remote areas that remain undisturbed to this day. This journal provides the most direct evidence yet of the deliberate, calculated nature of the Harper siblings' activities following their escape from the family homestead. It suggests not a random continuation of family madness, but a conscious effort to preserve and expand a tradition they considered valuable despite its obvious conflict with societal norms and laws. The question that continues to haunt researchers is whether William and Martha Harper were the last of their line or whether they succeeded in passing their knowledge and practices to a new generation. The reports of the Bone Lady and the evidence uncovered by Dr. Chen suggest they were at least partially successful, that some version of their tradition continues in the isolated communities of the Ozarks, adapted to modern circumstances, but retaining its essential character. If this is true, then there may still be individuals in the remote corners of the region who maintain private collections of carefully preserved human remains, each labeled with names and dates, each believed to contain the essence of its former owner. These modern bone collectors would likely bear little outward resemblance to Thomas Harper and his family. They might be respected community members, medical professionals, funeral directors, archaeologists, whose legitimate access to human remains provides cover for their private practices. The most disturbing possibility is that the network established by Martha Harper has evolved into something more organized and far-reaching than the isolated family practice it began as. Dr. Chen's research suggests connections between practitioners across multiple states with shared techniques and beliefs, creating a cohesive tradition despite geographical separation. If this network continues to operate, it represents not just a historical curiosity, but a living tradition that has survived by adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining its core beliefs. Local folklore offers one final chilling detail. According to stories still told in parts of Tenney and Stone counties, if you venture deep enough into the forests around what was once Harper land during the darkest phase of the moon, you might hear the sound of someone carefully arranging small, hard objects. The sound is said to be accompanied by a woman's voice softly reciting names and dates as though cataloging entries in a ledger. Those who claim to have heard this voice say it is not threatening or malevolent, but rather focused and methodical. The voice of someone engaged in work they consider important, necessary, and never complete. As you drive through the winding roads of the Ozarks today, passing small towns and isolated homesteads, consider this. Not all collectors display their collections. Some keep them hidden away in root cellars, in walls, in spaces beneath floorboards. And some collections once started develop a hunger of their own. A hunger that demands to be fed generation after generation long after the original collectors have themselves become part of someone else's collection. For those who study the hidden histories of rural America, the Harper case represents more than just a macabre tale from the frontier past. It offers a glimpse into the shadowy spaces where official history and lived experience diverge, where practices and beliefs considered impossible or unthinkable by mainstream society may continue to thrive in isolated pockets passed from one generation to the next through whispered instructions and private rituals. The bone collectors you didn't know existed may still be among us, their hands steady as they carefully clean, preserve, and catalog the physical repositories of human experience. Their work continues in silence and shadow, unnoticed by all except those who know exactly what to look for. The subtle signs of a tradition that has survived against all odds, adapting and evolving while remaining true to its essential purpose. And sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, when the wind moves through the hollow places of the world, you might hear the sound of bone touching bone, a sound as ancient as humanity itself, carrying echoes of stories that were never meant to be told, but which refused to remain silent. Made with red heart hash.